Today we're going to continue our series on Ecclesiastes. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes 7. And as you've seen up to this point through all of the chapters, it's kind of a bleak book, right? It's depressing in some points. I mean, you see that one of the most common words that comes up is it's either it's meaningless, it's vanity, it's just life is too much, it's absurd. It goes so fast. And then you got on top of that, you're thinking about death and you're thinking about, how do I find purpose? And in all of that, the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to remind us that there's a greater reality to focus on. When we put our faith in God, when we recognize that God has put eternity in our hearts, and when we place our faith in Him, knowing that we can't do it alone, and we need to trust in Him, it changes our perspective, but it does not take away from the chaos of this world, right? And one of the most apropos examples I could think of comes from this. Cleaning up after toddlers. This is me, by the way. This is how I clean up after my kids if I can. I see the mess, and got to get it. My wife's like, what are you doing? This is literally my kids too. I could leave one room, and right afterward, it's just immediately destroyed. And you can't hear the sound, but right at the end there, he was like, he drops the snack and vacuumed up. He's like, oh, where's my snack? Literally, my children, my tiniest kid is like bawling and crying, and I'm trying to pick up all her bananas and strawberries and Cheerios all over the floor that she's just chucked. It's like, you didn't want it. Friends, here's the thing. Life is chaotic. It is immense. When you think of all the things that you struggle with your work, with your family, with your school, with your friends, with any major life circumstances, when you hit really traumatic points or really great points, it becomes like a big pile that stacks up and up and up, and you can try to pick it up as quick as you can. But it feels like a mess. And it feels too tough. And it feels like the baggage is getting more. And sometimes we don't even want to look at the pile anymore. Pretend like the pile's not there. You distract yourself enough, and then you realize you've made another pile over here. Life is easier when you're distracted, but sometimes the distractions just don't last. And I think of this quote I think about quite a bit from The Lord of the Rings in the first book. Frodo, who's set off on this great adventure to take care of a great evil. He says, I wish it need not have happened in my time. And Gandalf, his mentor, is essentially saying, so do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have is what to do with the time that is given to us. And this is a hard thing to grapple with, especially when the world eludes our control. How do you continue living? How do you continue going forward? How do you continue doing all that you do when you realize you can't control the things around you? How many of you have tried? Have you tried? Picture a work day, average 8 to 5 day. You pick your work shift. Do you want to have a good day at work? Do you want to have a good day at school? Yeah, I mean, you want nothing to go wrong. You want nothing to go wrong at all. But something exciting happens. Something difficult happens. And quickly, the plan that you have made goes right through your fingers. And that's where life becomes chaotic. That's where control starts to elude us. In all of this, we might be left wondering, again, how do you figure this all out? Because it kind of leaves a big gaping hole in us, and it leaves this feeling like we need something to fulfill us. And what we're going to see inside of Ecclesiastes 7 is this idea that we are escaping the escapisms, escaping the distractions, escaping the things that blind us. And we'll see that a true life, a fulfilled life, is fulfilled in Christ. And this is in light of our sermon series big idea that when you trust in Jesus, life is fully lived backwards. We live in light knowing that Jesus has already won against sin and death. And when we see that we are living in that eternity now. And going forward, it is a journey towards a forever eternity with Jesus, rather than an ending point at death. So, here's how this looks. I struggled with this when I was looking at David Gibson's book, Living Life Backwards. I had never heard this phrase before. He called death the great evangelist. It sounds very strange. If you've read that portion in chapter 6, it kind of sounds jostling. What does it mean that death is an evangelist or a great evangelist? He starts out in verses 1 and 2 by saying, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume. And the day you die is better than the day you are born. How many of you agree with that statement? How many of you are confused by that statement? How many of you absolutely disagree with that statement? And it's fine if you do. It's jarring when you see the day you die is better than the day you were born. Sounds strange. But here's what the author's trying to push. When he's saying that death is an evangelist, it's saying that your life that has been fully lived is filled with experiences, is filled with all the wisdom and knowledge that goes along with it, with all of the influence and all the opportunities that you have chased after. Everything that you have done has been lived out and has impacted the people around you. So when you get to the day of your funeral, the people that you have impacted or the people that you have engaged with are impacted by your experiences, by your influence. So what he's saying is that the ones that have been born have experienced nothing yet. But the ones that have lived a full life, this betterness is showing that you are able to share the fullness of what life has had to offer. Verse 2, better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. I can't say I'm going to encourage you to go out and find a funeral to go hang out at. Promise you that's not the prescription here. But what he's saying is that when you spend time at a funeral, after all, when he says everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart, what is being said is that death as the evangelist is also saying that death is trying to remind us that we have a limit, that we are not God, that we are not invulnerable, and that we have one life here to enjoy and to make the most of. When you're spending your life laughing and trying to ignore all the things that are coming, when you're trying to say, death is something I'll think about one day. I'll think about all that God stuff at another point. I'll think about all the problems that I have when it really matters. I'll think about my taxes on April 15th. Don't do that. When we push all this stuff to the end and just live this, be happy, eat, drink, and, forget about all the tough stuff, we miss the bigger reality. We miss the considerations, the sober realities of death and the sober realities of the difficulties of life when they're wrestled with in the moment, when they're wrestled with knowing that we can't handle this by ourselves. We grow in that adeptness of wisdom. The questions to consider when you're spending all this time thinking about all of the good times, all the happy times, all the quick laughs. How often are you going to change anything if nothing is wrong? How often do you think you need to grow if everything feels fine? The difficulty in life is that when sorrowful situations come, we are to consider what comes next. And from that point on, that is what builds character. That is what you need to take to heart. So ultimately, death becomes either Lord or it becomes teacher. What do I mean by that? It becomes Lord if you place no faith in God and you push death all the way to the very end. If you push all the hard stuff to the very end, your ending is death. That is the final thing you have to confront. That is the sobering reality when you do life by yourself. Death is your Lord. Versus when you place your faith in God, death becomes a teacher, and it teaches you that you do have these limitations, you do have these problems, you do have these hurdles that you have to go over, but you are reminded that even though you have those limitations, you are not doing it alone. You have a God who is greater in control than you. Verse 3. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. A fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. This is also meaningless. So again, how is death a teacher when we trust in God? How he's a teacher? How it's a teacher is it teaches us that we're not invulnerable. It's not somebody else's problem. One day, each and every one of us in this room will die. Every one of us in this room will face a hurdle. Every one of us in this room will face stress and anxiety and fear, and something will stop us. But it does not have to be Lord over us. That's the thing that we have to wrestle with, friends. Either Lord or it's teacher. And God is even greater at helping us to see that we have a greater reality in him, and he is the one that fulfills us. These are often the escapisms that we resort to. In verses 7 through 10, it says, extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. So here's the schema that's built. These escapisms help us to avoid things in life. So, for example, money. It's said that everyone has a price, right? You heard that phrase before? I don't know if you've seen a video or a meme online where it says, would you slap your husband or wife for $1 bajillion? Would you do it? My wife says if it's an agreed upon thing. You're getting the money, right? Well, here's the thing. Everyone has a price in the sense that, you pay enough to some person. In politics particularly, it's said that, somebody can walk in unblemished and have the most noble of ambitions, but if you do not have skill in mudslinging and hurting other people in order so that you could stay on top, you're not going to survive in politics. Money corrupts, and it makes us to the point where we are avoiding the responsibility. We are escaping the hard wrestlings that we need to engage with truth, and we need to engage with the goodness and love towards other people. Money corrupts even the wisest of people and turns us into fools and corrupts the hearts, friends. It's an escape from responsibility. When it says finishing is better than starting, patience is better than pride, impatience is an escape from reality. I mean, the sheer amount of times I have heard, never pray for patience. I've heard that so many times. And, people say it in jest, but, again, God does give you those moments to be patient. When you practice patience, it's tough. I was thinking in light, my wife has been very active in making sourdough creations. All sorts of things, crackers, breads, cookies. I think she made lavender shortbread cookies yesterday. But if she told the sourdough, hurry up and rise, or if she quickly threw everything together and just chucked it in the oven, it would spoil the meal. You would not get that perfect element of trying to raise the product up in just the right way to make something delicious. Just like if you are trying to raise a child, you do not tell a child to hurry up and grow. You do not tell a husband or wife, hurry up and love me. You don't tell things to hurry up. Patience produces a beautiful product. It is tough, especially when you look at verse 9, when you think of controlling your temper, that anger labels you a fool. Anger is escaping the inability to control something. The invitation here is to try to encourage us to have a longer fuse when it comes to being angry. Yes, we will get angry. Yes, we will get frustrated. Yes, things will make us mad. James 1 talks about the idea of being quick to listen, slow to speak, and even slower to anger. And that's tough. But the invitation is helping us to learn to live that kind of wise life. When you're trying to when you're avoiding the fact that you cannot control something, yes, anger does come, but this is what we're trying to move away from. And the last one, nostalgia. Nostalgia is a really interesting thing. I think it's become kind of like a hobby horse to study this, and I'm going to actually go a little bit deeper into this. The author of Living Life Backwards spends the significant portion of this chapter in chapter 6 talking about nostalgia as well. The big question is, why was the past better? You know, I was born in the 90s, and it's easy to say, man, the 90s were great before the internet exploded. We spent all this time outside. You know, you might think the 80s were great, or the 70s were great, or the 60s or 50s were great. Or the 2000s. You pick the year that you thought was the best. Why was it the best? Why was it great? Why do you want to go back to that? Often when we think about this, at its core, nostalgia has ultimately changed over the course of years. It's moved from this idea of longing and homesickness, and it's morphed into this affection of past things. It's talking about this idea of a period or place or objects that have made us happy, though it is often tied now strictly to melancholy. You think more about how the past was better and I can never have that thing again, it becomes this lost thing. And when you're saying, you know, I long for those good old days, Solomon says this is not wise, because you're missing a bigger reality. You're focusing too much on the past, or you're too fixed on a future where you think you can recreate it. And you're no longer in the present, because what you do with this form of escapism is you are focusing too much on avoiding the present. So to go deeper into this, we're going to learn a little French today. Ready? Abjit patita. You say that with me? Abjit patita. Sounds really fun. Reason I bring up this concept, it comes from a philosopher called Lacan. I'm not going to say that he's somebody I want you to pursue studying, but what I want you to see is that he is a modern thinker who has tried to wrestle with life much like Solomon has done. And what he's done specifically is he's focused on this idea inside of nostalgia. He's created this idea when it comes to abjit patita, the object of desire which we seek in the other. It represents the little other or the other who is not. In fact, other but a reflection or projection of the ego. So let's break that down. Life is a maze. It's not amazing a lot of the time. It feels like a big maze. It feels like you're trying to find some big solution, trying to find some answer, trying to find some purpose, but you're lost in it. And it starts when you're a kid. If you've had kids and you show them a mirror for the first time, they lose their minds. They're like, who's that? You have to wrestle. Like, when you're a kid and you see yourself for the first time, you've discovered yourself. You have to wrestle with the I at first. Like, who am I? What is this? And I've seen this funnier video. You know, when you see young kids mature enough to a point and they suddenly realize, wow, I exist. They're not just saying random things anymore, which has been a daily occurrence for me. Kids say just the darndest things. But when they suddenly realize they are a person and they are able to think and they're able to do stuff, they're discovering themselves. And they move from this mirror stage when they're wrestling with the I or wrestling with the ego, and they're moving towards the imaginary. Through their eyes, their world sees all kinds of things. The world is strange. The world is amazing. And, anything is possible. Their imaginations explode. They discover the world again through their eyes. But then they get to the symbolic stage. This is where you put limitations on things. I think of the classroom. You raise your hand if you want to talk. Stay on task. Respect yourself. Always be a friend. Show respect to others. Think before you act. Always use kind words. This puts a quash on the imagination. This puts a quash on, just how much things do, and it narrows the focus. this stoplight element here. This is our common rules that we see. For me, growing up, I think in first grade, it was the penalty system. Green light, your good behavior. Yellow light, your okay behavior. Red light, your bad behavior. I was on the red light quite a bit. I was not a good kid. Anyways, like these things, they help you to develop these moments, or like you're almost, Lacan would call it a thrownness into life. You're thrown into life and you're trying to figure out how to be nurtured the right way, how to face this nature of life. You get to the real stage and you see that we are discovering hardships and rhythms. We discover that life is tough and you're trying to figure out how to keep going. You get to this point where we cannot explain life, but we have to keep life going. We get to that is what it is stage, and you're trying to figure out, how do you keep going past those times where things just don't make sense? We're perplexed by things, and then we're crippled by the nature of life. Towards the end of his life, Lacan also came up with this final point called the symptom, and he said that, we do hit that hard point where we're stuck. And the symptom would say, I have to move past that mirror stage where I'm only focusing on myself and become the best possible me I could possibly be. And this is the final fruits of one of the wiser philosophers of our time. His final result is be better. Is that good advice? How do you just be better? This is the cycle that he came up with Abjit Patita. You desire something, you experience the state of je sens. And you're driven towards that desire, you're trying to achieve it in the best possible way, but then you hit the prohibition and you have to stop because you realize you can't have that something in the way that you expect. You hit that lack point and you have to recreate the desire, but then you're back in that big cycle of going around and around and around, and then, as we talked about in the beginning, here's another pile of stuff. The symptom, as he says, is, that's his solution, just be better. But the desire for a true je sens is left to the ether. God's answer to this is twofold, as we'll see in just a moment. One is for wisdom, and two is to follow after him, knowing he is better in control than we are. So the truest sense of nostalgia, the idea that is lost a lot of the time, is that we are longing for a home. We have a homecoming or a homesickness with him. It's to become a more beautiful person, to experience a better place, to experience a thing that has never been met, and acknowledging that your past ultimately betrays you. God is giving you, in those moments of nostalgia, a profound glimpse at the intensity of perfection and beauty that you have actually yet to see. So what's pulling at your heartstrings is the future. Heaven and the presence with God, your sense of home and belonging, the truest and lasting sense of je sens, is that God is providing the fulfillment of that true desire. Your truest desire is fully met in God. The drivenness towards God is found in him. The prohibitions is letting go of the things of this world that bind you. And the lack, when you see you have that hole in you, is filled again with greater desire for God. This is God's answer when we're facing a human answer. The difficulty, though, is letting go of that human side, saying that I can figure it out and I can just be a little bit better version of myself. So again, here's the two solutions that are said in Ecclesiastes 7. Oh, I got 2 7s on there. So Ecclesiastes 7, 11 through 12 says this. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing. It benefits those who see the light of day, for wisdom provides protection, just as money provides protection. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves the life of its owner. So, if you're building an inheritance for yourself, if you have a savings account, if you are building up those funds and seeing things preserve and grow, yes, you do have a protection for yourself in this life. But what Solomon is trying to say is that that is not enough. Some modern examples, what I've seen, there's a recent movement that has come out called biohacking. Ever hear of that before? It's really weird. What ultimately it's saying is that if you hydrate yourself enough, if you have enough positive thinking, if you rejuvenate yourself, if you detox all the bad stuff, if you sleep enough, if you have enough nutrition and exercise well enough, if you give yourself and your body enough supplements, and if you meditate just enough, you're going to beat death. Death is just a sickness. Death is just an ideology. You can hack out death from your life. It's not believable, but there are many celebrities who are trying to push this and say, I can beat death. I have a higher score. They rate their life status based on how much they're doing. And, you know, you can do all these things, and they're great. They're great practices, but they're not enough. What Solomon is saying is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. And wisdom would see this is not enough. This only gets you so far, and even up to the point where you die, you're only going to preserve yourself up to that point. So the second solution, and integral to this point, is that we can't, but God can. Verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has bent? In times of prosperity, be joyful, and in times of adversity, consider this. God has made one as well as the other, so that no one can discover what the future holds. You know, in these moments, we're called to rejoice in the good times, and even in the bad times when we experience economic both prosperity and difficulty. We're to see that God is inviting us to see He's in control of all of that. And that's a tough thing to grapple with. But the peace that we experience when we know that God is fully in control is that He has a better plan than we do. And when we accept that all is from God, even when we don't understand the direction life is going, placing our trust in Him and relying on Him will help us in both the good times to avoid being puffed up, and the bad times to not be devastated beyond belief. This book I've been reading recently, it's called The Tale of Three Kings. It looks at the story of Saul, David, and David's son, Absalom. And it's showing the idea of how you handle authority and how you do not let power corrupt you. And in light of David, what this author is purporting is that he has entered a school of thought that no other person or not many people are willing to enter in the first place. And it's that of pain and trial. And understanding that he's not doing this alone. When he places his faith in God, he is being refined. When he was anointed as a boy to become king, he was not king like that. He was shepherd, an errand boy for many years. Then he was a warrior. And he fought a giant. And he fought many wars past that point. Then he had a king who was radically powerful, radically successful, coming after his life for 10, 15 years. Horribly miserable time for him. But in all of that time, he was being refined and built to be a man after God's own heart. And the invitation here is to see that when we're trusting in God, life becomes really tough in a lot of ways because we're rejecting a lot of things in this world. Things don't become as easy because you're not relying on the escapisms anymore. And you're realizing in those moments where things are too tough, you can't do it. It's a very humbling experience because you have to recognize because you can't do it, you have to rely on the God who can do it and will do it when you trust in Him. Now it doesn't want to work. There we go. I can't even control the clicker. When you look at verses 15 through 18, this is the excesses that blind us. It says, I have seen everything in this meaningless life, including death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? Pay attention to these instructions, for anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes. What this is saying is you're trying to avoid success, but it's not a prescription for moderation either. My wife has heard this phrase enough from me, everything is good in moderation. Yep, I say it. Because to an extent, it's true. But this is not solely what he's focusing on. He's not saying, just be good and be wise, but not too much, but be also evil and don't be too evil and don't be too foolish. What's being purported here is do not get too big of a head thinking you have it all figured out in your goodness and wisdom. You're going to mess up. You're going to do something wrong. You're going to make a wreck of your life. This world is tough. This world is chaotic. And there's a lot of stuff that we just can't do. But when you're puffed up and you think you got it all, it's like saying to God, don't worry, I got this. Likewise, when you're too foolish or when you're too wicked, you close your ears. You say, God, you're not for me. I'll figure it out. In both extremes, they both become blinders for us. And even in light of verse 15, it's showing this idea of this fairness in life. You see how some good people experience horrible things. Some good people experience health issues that bind them. Some good people experience radical senses of unfairness. They experience bankruptcies. They experience loss of family and friends. Whereas people who experience life in grandiose ways but are both wicked and awful, none of it feels fair. What Solomon is stressing is that even though you experience the unfairness of life, and even though you experience this constant flux of trying to do both good and bad and trying to figure out what the right thing and the wrong thing is, verse 18 is trying to show us that we are to pay attention to these instructions, specifically that anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes. The prescription is to fear the Lord. Martin Luther, an early reformer of the faith, I believe in the 16th century, what he said towards the end of his life is that we are beggars. This is true. What he's saying by that is that we are constantly in need, no matter where we are in our faith, we are constantly in need of God. And we are beggars of him, knowing that he is the one that continuously refines us. Verse 19 through 22, this is coping with the evil in reality. Verse 19, one wise person is stronger than 10 leading citizens of a town. Not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. Don't eavesdrop on others. You may hear your servants curse you, for you know how often you yourself have cursed others. And between these two, verse 19 and verses 21 through 22, they seem like separate parables. They seem like, unrelated topics. But what it's trying to show, right in the middle, this connecting verse, not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. I have heard so many people in life say, that person is so good. How could they be doing anything wrong? They help so many people. How could they do anything wrong? I can obviously trust in this person. I can trust in this politician. They're clean as a whistle. Sure. Okay. Every person sins and falls short of the glory of God. Not a single person escapes this because sin is prevalent. Sin is rampant. And it is an ever-growing problem. And we'll see that in this. And I want to remind you before I get going with this, if you've read this portion, it can come across as pretty difficult. So to preface this, this is written to a male audience initially, and this is also written specifically in light of the curse and the punishments that were listed inside of Genesis 3 when man and woman went their own way and did their own thing and rejected God. So, verse 23. I have always tried my best to let wisdom guide my thoughts and actions. I said to myself, I am determined to be wise, but it didn't work. Wisdom is always distant and difficult to understand. I searched everywhere, determined to find wisdom and to understand the reason for things. I was determined to prove to myself that wickedness is stupid and that foolishness is madness. I discovered that a seductive woman is a trap, more bitter than death. Her passion is a snare, and her soft hands are chains. Those who are pleasing to God will escape her, but sinners will be caught in her snare. This is my conclusion, says the teacher. I discovered that this after looking at the matter from every possible angle. Though I have searched repeatedly, I have not found what I was looking for. Only one out of 1,000 men is virtuous, but not one woman. I will explain that. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. But I did find this. God created people to be virtuous, but they have each turned to follow their own downward path. Again, this is written to a male audience, and he's talking to men specifically. But if you were to flip this, if Solomon was specifically focusing on women, he might say, in light of this, that man, the manipulative man, the one who is caring enough and kind enough to a point until he's no longer caring anymore, can become a chain. And it's hard to escape, and it's hard to avoid that snare. And that a woman may be searching and searching for a loving man, but so few ever fit that bill. You can flip those two, and Solomon can talk to either audience, but ultimately the point is not that man is better than woman or woman is better than man. When you look at the context of Genesis 3, in the curse, what is said there is that man becomes this hard-working, almost oppressive, cold taskmaster-like figure. They have to figure out work in spite of difficulty. Where woman, it's said that their desire is for control. Their desire is through the pain of their childbirth. And both have problems. Man hurts man. Woman hurts woman. Woman hurts man. Man hurts woman. Both become oppressive of each other because of the prevalence of sin. Again, verse 28 does not mean that men are slightly better than women. It prescribes the reality that although men can find at least one man who is a true friend, they are never to find a woman with whom, they never find a woman with whom they are able to enjoy such companionship without competition. Similarly, many women find at least one true female friend, even though they can never find a loving man. And this is in light of the schema of sin. When we're doing life by ourselves, this is the byproduct. Sin is all around us. Oppression is all around us. Hurt is all around us. It concludes in verse 29, I found this. God created people to be virtuous. He created everything perfectly. Everything was great. But we have each turned to follow our own downward path. Friends, again, this is not a competition between men and women here. Solomon is not trying to purport that this is, that's not his big point. His big point is that we all fall short of the glory of God. This is our limitation. But our hope, as we see in Colossians 3, is this. Just really take this and really soak in these words. Since you have been raised to new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Think about the things of heaven and not the things of earth, for you died to this life, and your real life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, is revealed to the whole world, you will share in all his glory. So put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world because of these sins. The anger of God is coming. You used to do these things when your life was still part of this world. But now, it is time to get rid of anger and rage, malicious behavior, slander, and dirty language. Don't lie to one another, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. In this new life, it doesn't matter if you are Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave or free. Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. Since God chose you to be the holy people He loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults, and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called to live in peace. Always be thankful. Let the message about Christ and all its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all wisdom He gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. And whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through Him to God the Father. Amen. This is the big idea, friends. At this time, Ignite can come up as well. A fulfilled life is fulfilled in Christ. The bottom line that I really want you to get is that death is a great evangelist. It is either Lord of our lives, that is the final product, if we're doing life alone, or it is our teacher, helping us to acknowledge that we have limitations. We have moments where we're just not enough. We are not invulnerable. Life is cyclical. It is difficult. That idea of abjit patita, we are trying to chase after the mythical thing that will fulfill us, but we ultimately find that it is never fulfilling until we get to the point where we recognize that God is the one that gives us wisdom, and He gives us Himself. And friends, we all fall short of the glory of God. We cannot do life alone. We need Jesus to save us to live a fulfilling life. And Jesus, friends, is inviting you every single day. If you've never placed a commitment to Jesus, if you've never committed your life to Jesus, what Jesus is inviting you into is a forever relationship with Him that never fails. He has perfectly paid for every single sin that you have ever thought, said, or done. And He has paid for it perfectly. Completely. Wholly. And He's inviting you to live a life that is fulfilled completely in Him. Because He has defeated sin and death, and He is victorious completely over it. And that living life backwards element that we're talking about in this series is that we are living in light that He has already won, and we are part of that victory when we place our faith in Him. So if you've never placed your faith in Him, and you want to talk about that today, I'll be up here. The elders will be up here. Likewise, if there's anything that we could pray for you for, I would love to be praying for you as well. So last thing, I would encourage you, I would challenge you, the final verses that we were talking about in Colossians 3, 1 through 17. Take some time. Have that as a devotional this week. Just pick one day. If you want, make that devotional for your week. Take a handful of verses or the whole thing at a time. Really soak in this portion. Because what you see here is that Jesus is inviting you into a completely changed life. In spite of everything that is happening, He's inviting you into a greater reality with Him. So, join us for our last song.